as they come in.
Yes.
So a very warm welcome to all of you who've joined us for this particular chapter of the CWDS seminar series. And this seminar series is part of the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav series, which we are doing to commemorate AKAM. And a very warm welcome to Professor Ajailiu Niumai. I hope I get your name right and I'm not mispronouncing it. A very warm welcome to you on behalf of CWDS and all the audience.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. I shall give a very brief introduction to Professor Niumai, and then we can go ahead with the talk. Professor Niumai is C.V. Raman Fellow and head at the Center for the Study of Social Exclusion and Inclusive Policy at the University of Hyderabad in Telangana. She's also honorary adjunct professor, Department of Science and Humanities, National Institute of Technology in Nagaland. She's member, managing committee, and a former convener of the Migration and Diaspora Studies, Indian Sociological Society. Among others, Professor Niumai's interests include gender relations, human trafficking, sex work, Indian diaspora and migration studies, and Northeast India studies. She has published widely in books and journals such as Economic and Political Weekly, Indian Journal of Gender Studies, Sociological Bulletin, International Anthropological Journal, and so on. And today, Professor Niumai is going to talk. The title of her talk is Untold Stories of Trafficked Survivors and Sex Workers in Manipur. So with these words, I hand it over to you, Professor. It's all yours.
Thank you so much for your kind introduction, Dr. Seema. I also take this opportunity to thank your entire faculty, fraternity, especially Professor Alka, and also your other colleagues for inviting me to this very special occasion. It is indeed an honor and pleasure for me to share my research findings on this untold stories of human traffic survivors and sex workers in Manipur. At the onset, I would like to mention that I have started working on this issue since 2008 onwards, after I encountered a woman in international airport in Imphal, who, that particular girl whom I met was apparently trafficked to Singapore. And later on, I was able to meet them and talk to them. And that is just the beginning, in 2008. This also would like to mention that Manipur has emerged as an origin and transit point for human trafficking, drawing from the narratives of survivors, government officials, and social workers. One can clearly see how factors such as neoliberalism and globalization contribute to the issue of human trafficking. Exploring the gaps in existing policies, one is also led to examine the linkage between commercial sex work and human trafficking in Manipur. Now, I would like to clarify that there is no legalized, red light area in Manipur, particularly in the capital city, Imphal. But there are unofficial hotspots of red light areas in different pockets of the city of Imphal. Now, ultimately, tackling the challenge of human trafficking requires the creation of social security and employment avenues, ensuring the social and also financial well-being of vulnerable women. My objective is to know whether there exists any connection between commercial sex work and human trafficking. No accurate data is available on human trafficking at the pan-India level. Forget about the state level. And many times when we talk of human trafficking, people assume that it is exactly the same as prostitution or sex work. So I try to look at the connection between prostitution or commercial sex work or flesh trade and then trafficking. Now, I also, attempt to explore the hidden domains in the world of trafficking and attempted to access the unpublished data only by fieldwork experience, because there's no other option for a social scientist or for anybody to get the data until and unless one do an authentic research at the ground level, at the field level. Now, human trafficking in Manipur is fundamentally a dependent variable where the anti-human trafficking laws and the law enforcement agencies, the State Child Protection Society and NGOs engage in combating human trafficking and sexual crime against women and children are effective so long as the state and civil society organizations work together. Triggering human trafficking is a transnational criminal network which the anti-human trafficking regimes are essentially incapable of handling. And this network acts as a conduit for the neoliberal economic culture by providing the physical and ideational links between the push and pull factors and the central idea that human trafficking is a route to social mobility. The neoliberal economic culture also acts as a soft power, attracting victims of human trafficking from Manipur towards the metropolitan cities, and in some few cases overseas, Singapore, Malaysia, and other countries, thereby providing the missing link between human trafficking and the pull and push factors. Now, one has to extrapolate the category of metropolitan cities as distinct from other urban centers, as by definition, metropolitan cities are large agglomerations where production and service sectors are located and thrive as parts of global networks. And the condition of the cities is to be read as part of a network society in a global constellation. My research questions includes which groups of people are more vulnerable to human trafficking, which social groups are the targets of traffickers, how are the survivors able to live a normal life after being reintegrated with their families. Now, I raise this question particularly because I work in Telangana and Andhra Pradesh on trafficking and sex workers. And earlier in my UGC project, which was from 2012 to 2015, was to compare between Manipur in the Northeast and then Andhra Pradesh united before the bifurcation, of South India. So I raised this question because I found that there's a huge difference between southern part of India and Northeast India when it comes to reintegration of traffic survivors. I would also like to mention that I raised this question as to how do we understand human trafficking in the context of globalization as the increased flow of goods and resources and the penetration of information as well as communication technologies have affected all aspects of our lives under the rubric of globalization. Coming to the methodology, I use a mixed method, and I employed individual interviews using a semi-structured questionnaires, case studies, and observations. Now, I adopted a purposive sampling technique, which is also called as a judgmental method, and a selective, or subjective sampling method, wherein the rescued traffic survivors who reside in Ujwala shelter homes, rescue home for the traffic victims only. You see, so Ujwala home is different from Swadhar home. Swadhar home is meant for those who are victims of domestic violence and abuse. But Ujwala homes across the country are meant only for the traffic victims. So I interviewed the survivors who are kept in the Ujwala homes. Also, some survivors have moved on with their lives after being counseled, after being given the vocational training and reintegrated with family members. And therefore some of the interviews were conducted based on the respective NGOs' experiences with the survivors, wherein they narrated stories about the survivors that they have rescued, and they have lived with for a couple of months, for in some cases for a couple of 1-2 years. Now, the unit of analysis in my study are 76 traffic survivors, including 4 men and 5 police officials, that ranges from sub-inspector to IGP, 2 officials from the social welfare department, 4 staff of NGOs, and 1 social activist who is a very well-known activist in Manipur, who has been actually working on the human trafficking issue and who has a close network with the police as well as the bureaucracy. Now, I use a snowballing sampling technique because gaining access to the traffic survivors is a Herculean task, and I managed to get access to them through the NGOs and the police. The field sites are located in Imphal West and Imphal East, in Taubal, Kaching, Teknopal, Chandel, Churachandpur, Tamenglong, Senapati, and Ukhrul. Now, my research assistants have visited all these districts that I just mentioned. And I myself have also accompanied my research assistant to conduct the interviews in many places. Coming to the categories of the traffic survivors, out of the sample size, total sample size of 76 traffic survivors, 53.9% are Nepali Dalit nationals, 23.7% are from the Kuki tribe, 5.3% are from the Maram Naga tribe, 5.3% are Manipuri Dalits called Lois. 2.6% are from the Mau Naga tribe, 2.6% are from the Paite tribe from Churachandpur district, 2.6% are from the Tangkul Naga tribe from Ukhrul district, 1.3% are Nepalese upper caste, 1.3% are from the Niumai Naga tribe, and then 1.3% are from OBCs from Manipur. Now, the majority of the respondents in my study are Nepali nationals who were rescued at Imphal and Moreh. Moreh is the hotspot of trade, between Myanmar and India. It is the international border town located just next to the Myanmar. Just next to Myanmar, where the victims, when they were in transit to Myanmar, the police and the NGOs were able to rescue many Nepali nationals in 2019, in the month of February. I remember the date, it was around 2, 3, and 4th of February when the police and the NGOs rescued them. And I flew from Hyderabad, if I remember correctly, on the 9th of February. So I was able to interview many of them and was also able to go to Myanmar to speak to the NGOs and the shelter home wardens and the staff to get the first-hand knowledge. And I also met some of the survivors. The traffickers were not able to, 4 of the traffickers were caught by the police, but I was not able to interview them because the superintendent of police informed me that I need to take a clearance from the court, which means I have to hire my own lawyer and then file an application, submit my application, and it takes a lot of time to get the clearance, and therefore I just left that plan to interview the traffickers directly, but indirectly from the police officials and the NGOs, I got to know the modus operandi of the traffickers and the whole detail of how they operate at a transnational level between Nepal and Northeast India. Now, the traffickers plan to ship the victims to West Asia from Myanmar via Manipur. And my study found a new trend of human trafficking where even men have become traffic victims, which was shocking to me because earlier when I started my first work from 2008 onwards, till 2018, I didn't come across adult men as victims of trafficking. I have found several boys in my first study, which was funded by the UGC. This research was funded by the ICCSR New Delhi. So in my first research, I didn't find any adult men as victims of trafficking. But in this study, particularly in 2019 fieldwork, I, to my surprise, found men are also becoming traffic victims. I realize and also, observe that men are trafficked for labor, not for sex work, not for any other purpose, but for labor. Now, the combined percentage of illiterates and literates below class 10 forms a large percentage of the total sample and indicates that a little knowledge is definitely dangerous. And this is the key to understanding the manipulation that such a group faces. And this group is also removed from manual labor and cannot aspire for higher posts, and therefore they are easy prey for the traffickers. So we can explain this by the preponderance of the nuclear family to which more than 75% of the respondents belong. Manipur at the center of trafficking in Northeast India is something that I look at very minutely. And most of the traffic survivors, even from my earlier research project funded by UGC and the second project by ICCSR, I found that majority of the victims are tribal people from the hills of Manipur, besides the Nepali nationals. And 32.9% of them are trafficked to Bangalore, 26.3% to Kuwait, 22.5% to Iraq, 9.2% to New Delhi, 6.6% to Dubai, and 2.6% to Gurgaon near Delhi. Now, even the police officers, they were perplexed, and they often told me, "Madam, we are not sure why people want to be trafficked to Kuwait or Iraq." One of the top police officers, I don't want to name him, said that perhaps some of them will be recruited in ISIS. Another thing is that to UAE, obviously, because the underbelly of Dubai is sex work. All the nightclubs, one of the top police officer in Guwahati, who is the head of CBI, when I interviewed him, have clearly mentioned that most of the nightclubs in Dubai have girls from the Northeast when he physically went to verify. Now, when I asked him during the interview why he didn't attempt to bring them back to India, he said that it is not possible. Their passports are seized by the traffickers, by the agents, and it is impossible for the police to intervene. See, it's also to do with law. In India, ITPA, Immoral Traffic Prevention Act of 1956 is applied. And according to this law, the NGOs or the police are not empowered or doesn't have the legal right to take up the case of Indian girls who are trafficked to foreign countries. So that is the loophole of the law. And another thing is that obviously, you know, the police officer cannot just bring hundreds and dozens of girls in a foreign country back to India when their passports are seized by the trafficking agents, which is disguised as a job recruiting agent. Now, a huge percentage, 39.5%, said that they came in touch with human trafficking agents through friends. 32.9% said through neighbors. 23.7% said they contacted the agents. 2.6% said through their relatives. And 1% said that the agent contacted her directly. Of the total respondents, 71.1% said that traffickers assured them of employment for which they were willing to migrate, while the rest claimed that the traffickers lured them by giving false promises of free education. Now, this trend indicates that the survivors were lured with expectations of high income in a foreign land. Iraq, Kuwait, Bangalore, and Delhi are the major destinations of a large percentage of traffic victims in my study, comprising of 76 victims. And there seem to be two possible explanations for this. Delhi and Bangalore are the most crucial cities in India. And this raises the question of why not any other cities like Chennai, Hyderabad, or Mumbai. We see that both Delhi and Bangalore are the traditional destinations for students from Northeast India to study since 1950s, 60s, and particularly 70s and 80s onwards. Moreover, it is here that familiarity and a network have already been established, you know, and it would arouse less suspicion on the traffickers. And human trafficking is not only imposed by the traffickers on the victims, but quite a few respondents decided voluntarily to be trafficked in the guise of seeking employment. The fact that these women entered the sex trade with some sense of willingness does not support the assertion that they agreed to all the forthcoming risks and dangers, as they were ignorant of the seriousness of the possible consequences. There are cases where girls and women are reluctant to go with the traffickers, but their economic condition forces them to go to their intended destinations. The study found that 56.6% of the respondents were in domestic servitude, 32.9% were in forced labor, and 5.3% were being sexually exploited in nightclubs, bars, and spas. About 2.6% mentioned other work. One respondent worked as a civil engineer. Actually, this civil engineer is from Nepal. And the police, while interviewing, told me that they're shocked that even a well-educated person, you know, a highly skilled person like a civil engineer can also be deceived by the traffickers, you know. And another man whom I interviewed was a security guard. Now, there is more demand for domestic servants and laborers in metropolitan cities due to the difficulty in getting domestic labor. People from the Northeast are perceived to be hardworking, committed, more caring, and trustworthy. Now, I want to also mention that the tribal girls from Jharkhand are also demanded quite high in metropolitan cities like Delhi. But Manipur undoubtedly among the 8 states of Northeast is in the hot spot. Now, about 40.2% of the respondents said they got help from the police to escape. 22.4% said they got help from the police and the NGOs. 17.8% said they got help from their family and NGOs. 13.1% said they themselves managed to escape from the traffickers. And 4.6% got help from NGOs alone, and 1.9% said they got help from a client from Assam. This is from a brothel in Mumbai. I have the detailed story of some of these women from Assam, you know, and a majority of them, 92.1%, uh, got 4 to 6 hours of sleep and rest time, and 7.9% said they got 6 to 8 hours of sleep or rest time. Nearly 90.8% respondents said that they were allowed to remain in touch with family, and 9.2% said that they were not allowed to remain in touch with their family. Now, many were lulled into the false sense of insecurity, wherein they felt that they were connected to their family members. Yet in reality, they were in the control of the traffickers. Some of them felt that it was their fate to be in that situation, and they had come to terms with such a reality. There are cases where I've interviewed the family members. The family members told me that whenever they call, some men will pick up the phone and said that the daughter have gone for work, and so over the period of time, they stopped contacting. And then their children, their women or their daughters who are in their destination state or country also calls up the parents, and they can't eventually tell everything to their parents. Perhaps they, as I said, they come to, they feel that it was their fate to be in that situation, and they didn't want to trouble their parents anyway. Most of them, 99.9% of them, are from an extremely poor family, so they knew that it is next to impossible for their parents to come and rescue them. Now, Manipur has also emerged as a transit point for international human trafficking. It is emerged as a convenient transit route, for the trafficking racket. For instance, 179 trafficked Nepalis, 147 women and 32 men, including traffickers, were arrested by the Manipur Police and Department of Social Welfare, Government of Manipur, in Moreh, and also in and around Imphal city near the airport, after information was received by a very prominent NGO in Kathmandu called Mighty Nepal, and Impulse NGO Network in Shillong in February 2019. Impulse NGO Network is run by Hasina Kharbi. Some of you may be aware of her work. Now, the traffickers found it easy to obtain the special permit at Moreh to transit to Myanmar. I just wish to come back to the, to show you this picture. These are all Nepali women who were rescued in Manipur. Now, the traffickers found it easy to obtain the special permit at Moreh to transit to Myanmar. Hence, they used the Moreh route to traffic Indian and Nepali girls and women, and some men, to Myanmar, where some of them are given new identities in Myanmarese passports. So from Myanmar, they have trafficked ahead to West Asia and South Asian countries with a new identity as a Myanmarese, no longer an Indian or a Nepali. Their identity is no longer related to their country of origin. A crime investigation department police officer said to me during the interview, and I quote, "A Mizo girl was trafficked to Myanmar via Moreh, and she was provided a Myanmar passport to travel to Singapore. Unfortunately, she committed suicide, and it was not possible to bring her dead body back to Mizoram due to malified documentation. Trafficking via Moreh, that is in Manipur, Moreh route, affirms that it is an organized and trans-criminal network. The neighboring countries should come together and tackle this issue collectively," unquote. The Nepalis, in groups of 30 to 40 people, arrived from Nepal to Manipur via New Delhi. And this reveals that there was a massive enrollment drive of girls and women in Nepal by the traffickers because of the demand for them from other countries. Some of them arrived by air, while some others came by road and train via Guwahati. I was in the University of Tel Aviv in December 2018 to deliver an invited special lecture in Department of Sociology. After my lecture was over, one of the Indian students walked up to me and said that he is interested to do a research on Nepali caregivers in Israel. So I asked the boy, how many Nepali caregivers are there in Israel? To my surprise, the boy said 3,000 Nepali caregivers. housemates and nannies and caregivers to elderly and things like that. Now, that was in 2018. Now, when I conducted my research, especially with the Nepali nationals in 2019 February, within a span of hardly one month or 1.5 months, I could connect how hundreds, thousands of Nepali nationals have used the Manipur route, More route, to traffic their own people with a false passport to different parts of West Asia and the Middle East. Now, this suggests a network of organized crime by the traffickers. Even before the rescue of 179 Nepali nationals in February 2019, the top police officers and the CIDs told me during the interview that they have a record of 300, 400 Nepali nationals who have already crossed the international border and have entered Myanmar. And it's very easy for them to get the Myanmarese passport, which means that all of them have already got the passport from Myanmar and have flown to different parts of their destinations. And the police couldn't do much, although they got a tip-off, they couldn't perhaps work it out effectively till February 2019. Now, it also indicates the socio-economic and political situation in Nepal and the poor conditions which push these people to other countries. Kesam Pradeep Kumar is a well-known social activist in Imphal, said to me during the interview that traffic survivors do not know that they were trafficked, as some Nepali survivors have worked abroad earlier, and they felt that they were traveling to find new jobs again in another country. Traffickers deceived them by charging around 3 to 4 lakh rupees in Nepalese currency with a promise of providing a job abroad. And the same thing is echoed by many police officers. There were middlemen who are local traffickers, but they do not meet each other very often. In Manipur and Myanmar, there is a couple who runs a business in Delhi who were caught by More custom officials. Later, they were freed as they had legal documents to travel abroad. The police came to identify them as the kingpin after they were rescued. Now, let me look at how there is an intersection of caste, class, tribe, and race. My study examines the intersection of all these factors that I just mentioned and the ways in which they overlap to create a hybrid experience for traffic survivors that can be understood clearly by looking at the relationship between these categories. Caste, class, and tribe stratifications have an economic rationale for the sex workers. In one of the hotspots in Pauna Bazaar was Venus, a young bispectacle woman of about 25 years, clad in black jeans and a yellow t-shirt, who plied her trade with confidence. I went for my field work here in this Pauna Bazaar red light hotspot hotel with one of my bureaucrat friend and research fellow of this project. And this respondent happened to be the youngest, and most confident sex worker in the group of 7 women whose ages range from 25 to 50 years. Now, let me also emphasize that once these women reach 60 years, their value is lower than 100 rupees. And this is affirmed in southern part of India, Telangana and Andhra Pradesh during my interview. One of the women who's 55 years in Hyderabad while interviewing told me that she will retire within 5 years. I asked why, and she said that who wants to buy a woman who's 60 years old for even 100 rupees? And so they have their limit. Once their body shrink, they are not valued in the sex commercial work. Now, like her peers, this young lady of 25 years claimed that she was pushed into prostitution 3 years ago after her husband left her. Her husband was a drunkard and addicted to number 4, which is a local name for the heroin smuggled from Myanmar and made through the poppy plantation, poppy flowers. Now, her husband abandoned her and their 2 children to marry another woman. Her husband, she claimed, was a tribal who lives in Thangmeiban, Imphal area, but unfortunately passed away due to HIV/AIDS. Incidentally, this lady Venus, whom I name as Venus, claimed that she is from Puilong village and fluently spoke Niumai Naga dialect. And she implied that it was her husband's language, not hers. And this indicated that even the world of the sex worker is a stratified world, socially layered, and intersects with caste, class, language, so on and so forth. The local Manipuri, the Meitei, the major community sex workers, are said to command a higher rate than women who belong to the tribes, the socially lower place group in the stratification system. That explain why this Lady Venus wanted to de-affiliate her tribal linkages in front of her peers, although she may have been born a tribal and still spoke her native language. In a place in Imphal, there is a place called Khoyathong. Over in Khoyathong, there is a very old NGO, and when I went there a couple of times to interview the staff, they told that most of these tribal ladies who are commercial sex workers come to Imphal, the capital, during Christmas season. And they earned, and then after that, they would buy dresses, Christmas dresses for their family members, and then leave just 1 day or 2 days before Christmas. But then the local Meitei sex workers, Manipuri women sex workers, continue to do their work throughout the year, whereas most of the tribal women come only during the festival to earn and then go back home. Now, the race provides a rationale for explaining how traffic survivors encounter social exclusion. Race and residence status also define the class of the hotel and the employees, waiters, as well as the sex workers. In the lingo of the sex workers, the brothel is a hotel, and the pimps working there are waiters. Although racism was not evident, there was clear territorial and operational distinction between the sex workers who belong to the different races and residences. When I walked in to this Pauna Bazaar hotspot, the reception area was very, very dark. It's a dim light where I saw two men lying in a bench and one man was sitting in a chair, as if they are the receptionists, male receptionists. But it's quite obvious that they are the pimps, and they are working there as waiters or as male receptionists. Now, the hotspot in which this girl, Venus, in Pauna Bazaar and her peers ply and run their trade is a local hotspot and an upper class hotel. And known local sex workers from the Nepali community, the Bihari, and other communities ply their trade in other hotspots in Thangal Bazaar and Khoyathong Bazaar. These are all in the heart of Imphal city, the capital of Manipur. Now, about the economic pools, Venus narrated that she made about 6,000 on a day, and on bad days, hardly anything. I, in fact, proposed to her that I can help her to come out of this sex work and connect her to the right NGO who will train her and empower her through vocational training, and that she can work as any normal woman. She refused to my proposal. And she said that her clients included all kinds of men, from rickshaw pullers and thaliwala daily wage laborers to young men from the busy byline of the market locality. Now, like her peers, she claimed proudly that she ran her household with her earnings and also looked after her physically invalid father and a sister who was HIV/AIDS positive. A matriarchal family set up by default is what Venus and her peers claim to head in their respective narratives and families. There are also women who told me during the interview that they plan to leave sex work after they clear the debt, after they have taken loan and they're doing this work in order to pay off their loan. Now, this accidental role reversal is a traditionally patriarchal society in Manipur, is something which the sex workers seem to be proud of. Ironically, Venus and her peers kept their profession under strict secrecy from their families and neighbors in the locality. Now, what is interesting about Venus' case is her profession as a sex worker and her implied reference to herself as a victim of human trafficking. She claimed to have been a caretaker for family in Bangalore for a year and came back to Imphal in March 2017. Shortly after her return from Bangalore, a friend coaxed her to join prostitution at this location in Pauna Bazaar. So she did not state that she was trafficked to Bangalore, but she had worked there as a maid and had been sexually exploited by the employer. She suppressed the work experience, but referred to Bangalore among her peers as a symbol of social mobility and status. Now, to win the confidence of the respondents, we maintained the flow of the conversation. The interview was switched to an unstructured mode, and this girl Venus was not prompted to elaborate on her Bangalore work experience. She is a victim of sex trafficking who joined the world of sex work due to the push factors prevailing in Manipur when pull factors are present within the locality. Now, this confirmed to the classical studies of parent Dutchlet, Lily Brandt, and also Rickere, as mentioned in Simone de Beauvoir's book, The Second Sex, which affirmed that 50% of the prostitutes were first servants before being exploited by several masters to the point where sex is often equated with coitus only. Prostitution becomes a gainful employment for these women as it is a natural progression from their earlier employment. Some of them came from the surrounding hills of Manipur and were often unknown in the capital city. Therefore, they did not have a reputation or a prestige to defend in the heart of Imphal city. So this Simone de Beauvoir's affirmed that reputation is a means of, prostitution is a means of livelihood for these women from the economic perspective is quite true. Now, an NGO staff called Rasi, who is a former sex worker, said that they do not have a complete data of traffic victims and sex workers. The number of sex workers increases during Christmas season, as I mentioned earlier, since many tribal girls and women from the hill districts of Manipur come to the capital and join the trade in order to buy new clothes for Christmas. So the prevailing perspective on human trafficking in Manipur are reflective of the feminist regulationist approach on sex work as adopted and passed by the state. I have a whole range of photographs from my fieldwork, but to protect the identity of my respondents, I am not putting up the slides. Now, following the ambiguous approach of the Immoral Traffic Prevention Act of 1956, the government of Manipur has no official policy for sex workers or prostitution. So as a corollary, it has no official data on sex workers in the state. On the other hand, the state has adopted the policy of safe sex. So if you see in the Imphal city, there are huge billboards, we say safe sex, as it faces the danger of HIV, sexually transmitted diseases, epidemic due to drug users, intravenous drug users since the 1980s onwards, because Manipur is very close to the Golden Triangle in Myanmar, where huge poppy plantations are there to produce this cocaine. Now, this policy ambiguity towards the plight of sex workers and human trafficking victims negatively impinges on the state's ability to address the challenge of human trafficking. Let me come to the intersectionality feminist theory. As human trafficking is a global phenomenon, it has to interact with the criminal networks in Manipur that which are again connected to larger global criminal networks. An intersectionality approach is being adopted to explain this process of subjugation and discrimination of girls and women of color. Women and girls from Manipur with Oriental racial features are often perceived as the people of the Far East. As a result, they face discrimination and social exclusion in the metropolitan cities. Moreover, most of these traffic survivors belong to the scheduled tribes and a few scheduled castes or deprived socioeconomic backgrounds. They're considered as the second sex and find it challenging to meet to make ends meet in a patriarchal society. Therefore, intersectionality theory provides a framework to examine the intersection of race, tribe, class, gender, and the like. The tribal and Dalit survivors from Manipur and Nepal in my study, who were trafficked for forced labor and also for sexual exploitation, draw our attention to a social reality which need to be examined from a perspective of intersection between various forms of discrimination, subjugation, exploitation, and exclusion. The experience of being a tribal woman or a Dalit woman with Oriental racial features in forced labor and sex work can be understood from the intersection of being labeled as coronavirus during COVID time, or Chowmen or Chinky or Nepali or tribal, along with being a woman of easy prey, or a woman of loose moral character, or a housemaid or prostitute. You know, these intersections of identities reinforce each identity frequently in their everyday lives. When the forms of identities of these girls and women intersect, their experiences of discrimination interact to give a multifaceted perspective. The forms of discrimination interrelate, and therefore the survivors are subjected to multiple forms of subjugation in a patriarchal society. Geraldine Forbes asserts that while feminists oppose the exploitation of women, they do not agree on how to define or combat trafficking. You know, Professor Yu Bindia, George, and Somya Ray from IIT Guwahati have written this particular article on trafficking, wherein they highlighted two feminist perspectives, that of neo-abolitionists, for whom prostitution equals trafficking and should be eliminated, and that of neo-regulationists and other groups for whom trafficking is forced prostitution, where sex work is a legitimate and willing form of labor that should be decriminalized or legalized. They emphasize that for neo-abolitionists, prostitution is inherently an institution of male domination, an exploitation of women, and therefore cannot be given the status of work, and the sex industry should be entirely eliminated because of its objectification and oppressive treatment of women. The feminist approach leads us to examine the vulnerability of traffic survivors, as there is a high level of subjectivity in the rendering of these accounts. The normal critique of such an approach would be the dismissal or a watering down of such narratives. But the ideas of intersectionality explained as such subjectivities are constituted not merely by the subjects as victims in all situations, but in definite social locations where elements of power act on the victims. Now, borrowing from Michel Foucault's ideas of how human beings react to situations, the key elements are power and the unequal access to it, and the constitution of power relations and their exercise on individuals in a wide variety of situations, which is brought out in the following case studies. One is a Kuki tribal girl from Churachandpur district, from a village called Lunmual village. She was detained by the police at Imphal airport in June 2017, when she attempted to board a flight to Singapore via Calcutta. She had a passport, her bank account statement, Aadhaar card, and a forged work pass issued by the Ministry of Manpower Singapore to be used in transit. El Kipgen, a 29-year-old man of Kangpopi, had arranged this document for the minor girl, while Tommy of Churachandpur, the main trafficking kingpin, was already stationed in Singapore. The girl was provided with a Singapore phone number of Tommy to contact her there. Tommy is a woman trafficker. The agent and the parents has falsified the age of the girl, claiming that she was 18 years old. Later, it was established that she was a minor. The father of the victim, Tauthang, admitted that the victim was born in 2003 and was only 14 years old at the time of the incident in June 2017. The picture over here on the right side is an air hostess who identifies trafficking of girls in various flights in the United States. Now, this particular girl from Churachandpur had been studying in class 8 at a higher secondary school in her town in Churachandpur, but she dropped out due to poverty. At the airport in Imphal, one of the police police sub-inspector, who also is in charge of the, Imphal Airport Anti-Trafficking Squad. Anti-Trafficking Squad was in Imphal for the first time in India in 2017-18. Now, Kheda Yumnam, during the interview, admitted that Kipgen, the local agent from Kangpopi, has slipped away, from the airport at the time when Kheda Yumnam and his team caught hold of the girl. I found that Kheda Yumnam has given me very precious information, and I must confess that he's one of the most bold police official in Manipur. He didn't fear of anybody, and he showed me thousands of photographs of traffickers and the victims that the police anti-human trafficking unit have rescued and act upon. Now, a report had been issued for the arrest of Kipgen and that of other associates to unravel the network of trafficking, but the report does not have any lead on the status of the case. The girl was obviously traumatized and handed over to the Child Welfare Committee in Imphal and produced before the magistrate on 29 March 2017. It becomes clear that some parents send their daughters for availing free education, jobs as housemates, nannies, and the like, or caregivers. Some of them end up doing sex work by coercion or by deception. Another case study is a Nepali national called Manisha. I name her Manisha, 28-year-old, from Hetaura, Annapani village, Makwanpur district in Nepal. She said that from 2013 onwards, she has been working as a daily wage laborer and earned Nepali currency of 500 rupees a day. In December 2018, one trafficker called Mr. Lili met her through a common friend and recommended that she work in Kuwait, stating that she would be paid well. She discussed with her parents, who agreed to let her go. On 22nd January 2019, she left her house for Kuwait and met Mr. Lili in Kathmandu bus parking area as agreed. He introduced her to another Nepali girl, Jan, to travel to Delhi together. When they arrived at Delhi's bus parking from Kathmandu, a stranger came to receive them and he kept them in a hotel for 3 days. On 29th of January 2019, they reached Imphal to Hilal International Airport, and one unknown person who is a friend of Mr. Lili in Kathmandu received them and arranged accommodation in a hotel at Imphal near the airport. At the hotel, she met many unknown Nepali girls who came from Nepal to go to Kuwait in order to get jobs. They stayed at the hotel together for 3 days. On 2nd February 2019, a team of Manipur police rescued them from the hotel, and they were kept at Ujwala Shelter Home, managed by the Southern Manipur Rural Technology Service Institute, Kakching, Manipur. She was not aware that they would be taken advantage of and thus labeled as being trafficked. In fact, the police officers and the NGO leaders who were in this trafficking rescue event told me during the interview that many of these Nepali nationals were angry. They said that you have killed our job opportunities. We are not traffic victims. They do not know that they were being trafficked. That is very clear. Now, let me come to this important portion, life after integration. After they are rescued, after they are reintegrated with the family, what happened? Basically, I seek to unravel the untold stories of the girls and women who have been trapped within the interlocking structure of inequality, poverty, and patriarchy. Poverty and lack of opportunity in Manipur pushed these women to migrate in search of something more substantial. So is from Nepal. It is obvious that all these traffic survivors were searching for something better, greener pasture. After being rescued and reintegrated with their families, some of them live in shame and silence due to stigma in societies. But over a period of time, they move on with their lives. The rescued survivors were given effective counseling by the NGOs, which is necessary for them to restart their lives with dignity and strength. The NGO staff provided psychological counseling to the survivors and their parents before reintegrating them. Most survivors live in a normal life after being reintegrated with their families, and many young survivors continued their education. Parents took back their children and embraced them willingly. The majority of the survivors are tribal people, as I mentioned right from the beginning, who have a strong sense of community tradition. Sociologically, the tribal communities share common values, norms, or belief systems. They do not have hierarchies, and there is acceptance for people in the event of failure. Some of the survivors have managed to put their past behind them and move forward with their heads held high. 30-year-old Rita had lost all hope of ever seeing her family again in Tamenglong district, Manipur, trafficked in June 2008 to Singapore by a local trafficker. When she was just 18 years old, she worked as a housemaid for 12 months without salary, although she was promised to be paid 20,000 per month. When the NGO's rescue team found her after she had been held captive as an unpaid housemaid, she broke down. Rita expressed that every attempt of hers to escape had failed, and that when her employee's family caught her, she had been bitten. The traffickers seized her passport. Rita's story is similar to many other stories, who had been trafficked to India's metropolitan cities and abroad. It is challenging for them to get healed from the trauma and the internal injury of their horrific past. Having been back in her village, she faces silent stigmatization, but she completed her class 12 examination and pursued nursing in another state. Today, she serves as a nurse in a private hospital. She has overcome her past with the support of her family. Viewed from the perspective of a neo-abolitionist feminist framework, these cases, case study shows that there is a possibility of positive change. It is possible to end the exploitation of girls and women with the support of families and NGOs as the survivors transition into decent alternative employment avenues. Let me just come to the conclusion part of my talk. The human trafficking issue in Manipur shows that the challenge is deeply rooted to the weaknesses of the anti-trafficking regimes. Preventing trafficking in Manipur would require the creation of social security, job avenues, and financial well-being of everyone. The international cross-border trafficking in the study reveals the NGOs in neighboring states and countries, like, for example, Nepal or Myanmar, are effective instruments in combating trafficking. It is obvious that the traffickers understand the vulnerability of their potential victims and are able to lure them. Simple-minded, trusting parents often fall into this trap. Friends, neighbors, and known people are the primary introducers of the trafficked victims to the trafficker. In this study, we have not come across any cases of re-trafficking, which is quite amazing. Perhaps it is due to the parents of traffic survivors who have become vigilant after the past experiences. Moreover, the women may be able to sustain themselves within their means, and there's also a strong sense of community among the tribes for enabling the survivors to be reintegrated into their community. So we have seen that the feminist neo-abolitionist theory and the neo-regulationist theory are relevant in Manipur. The neo-abolitionist theory is seen when the traffic survivors go on to be empowered through the NGOs and family support. And then they find the alternative means of livelihood. There are several cases where traffic victims have worked as housemaids earlier and were exploited by their employers. And some of them have gone on to do sex work. This is a clear example of the latter theory in play. The neoliberal human trafficking began with the growth of the neoliberal market economy in India and also in Southeast Asian countries. Women from the impoverished state of Manipur see the promises of prosperity in the neoliberal culture prevailing in India's metropolitan cities and in Southeast Asia as having emancipatory values, and traveling there is a means of achieving social mobility. So lastly, I want to make this point that connecting the push and pull factors is the transnational trafficking network. And this network pushed young children and women into forced labor. And in recent past, even few men, and sex work in metropolitan cities, which was examined from the intersectionality perspective. Pushed by poverty, conflict, and lack of employment opportunities, even parents in poverty-stricken families become complicit in the efforts to send the children to work in big cities And then the widespread use of English language in service-oriented industries like the BPO call centers, hospitality industries, aesthetic services like beauty parlors, spas, massage centers, and the like in India's metropolitan cities attract people from Manipur. These are the result of neoliberal market policies and a part of the new knowledge economy. And this is reflected in the rise of the service sector. And hence, such people are the ideal candidates that make up this workforce. This is in addition to the migration for education and employment in government and private sector. So as migration increased in numbers, so did the cases of human trafficking. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Ajailiu Niumai, for your presentation. Now the floor is open for the questions. Yes, please.
This is Manu Goraha from Vikram University. Hello.
Yes, please. Yes, please. Go on.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Niumai. Thank you very much for your presentation. Actually, I represent an area where there is again a kind of prostitution that is very prevalent here in Malwa region of Madhya Pradesh, and there is a particular tribe, Bachada, who are involved in prostitution activities, and that is part of their culture. Okay, this is what I have
about them. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. This is what I have found, and as recent as a day before yesterday, I had an opportunity to have a conversation with one of the young lady who was involved in prostitution. And to my greatest surprise, this is what I was thinking: ki the particular tribe is involved, particular caste is involved. It is a scheduled caste. Particular caste is involved, but this is what I have realized now, that it is not that particular caste, but because of the poverty. You had mentioned this aspect, that poverty has also driven them into prostitution. So this is what I found with my conversation with one of the young girl. She was of 21 years of age. And when I asked her name, she was very frank in that sense. I asked her name, she told me she is Malvi. Malvi means she is not a representative of the particular caste which is involved in prostitution. And this is what I realized, because of poverty, many of the young girls are involved in prostitution in the guise of a particular caste which is involved in traditionally which is involved in prostitution. You would surprised to know, Professor Niumai, I mean, the male members of that particular caste bring customers to their home to be serviced by their wives, by their mothers, by their sisters. So this is what I realized. This is what has happened. I just wanted to share my experience.
Yeah, thank you. I've heard about them. I just would like to add that World Vision as an NGO has a massive program working there in Madhya Pradesh as well as in Maharashtra and Rajasthan belt among this community, the tribal community, where daughters, mothers and wives would be pushed to do sex work while men would relax and bring in clients, So the men in the family work as the pimp for their own women. So this is an age-old tradition, which you rightly pointed out. Such kinds of practices, cultural practices, are not found in any of the cultures in Northeast tribal community or even in Manipur. We don't have it in the Manipuri Meitei community nor in the tribal communities. You are right. I agree with you that there are community, there are NGOs, there are government agencies. They're trying to intervene and bring them out of this kind of tradition. So thank you for sharing.
Feature. What was the striking feature was that in the guise of that particular caste practice, people from other castes are also involved in prostitution. That was more, this is what I realized, that is quite, I had an impression that they were belonging to that particular caste, but people from other castes were also involved in prostitution and in the guise of that particular caste. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing.
I'm Elizabeth here. Thank you, Professor Ajay, for your very detailed as well as very inclusive data, especially because the part where we are talking about the intersectionality of even the rates when it comes to caste, tribe, or the community or the location, that is also a very interesting aspect. And one thing, that's what we know, that prostitution or sex work is a very old profession, but it's not being, even if it's a very old, it's not easily accepted, and many are not still in controversy, though it still happens. And you were rightly pointed out that in the many Northeast society or in Manipur, we don't have the, because even Rajasthan has a community where they accepted community that is their work. This is an interesting aspect. If we look on the Indian context, at one point we despise sex work or prostitution. In another side, also the society has particularly castigated a caste as doing that work. This is something that, as a feminist, ideology, or from the perspective that we have to think about it, and because it's a very encompassing. But one thing that is working on issues of women who have been trafficked or who are brought in the intention of using other intensive or other kind of labor, but in the process always through trafficking route, the vulnerabilities are being used as a profit-making engineering business perspective. That is the reason why that all these things are happening. But we would definitely would like to look into it, that how do in the, we call it the post globalization, or how in the very traditional stronghold notions, as well as in the economic situation that we are facing, then how this vulnerability to be reduced. I know it's a very, it sounds vague, but the thing is that how to reduce this is a big question.
Yeah, a very good question, and very much a part of my question in the study as well. Number one, Elizabeth,
Yes.
I feel that the state government should have its own policy, not necessarily depend on the Immoral Traffic Prevention Act of 1956, because that act has a lot of loopholes.
Yes.
And so therefore, I met the Chief Minister Biren in 2017 May, and we had a closed door meeting in his office for 20 minutes. And I also highlighted all my major research findings to him, and told him that Manipur is at high risk and used as an international transit route. And therefore, the state government should pull up its socks and form an anti-human trafficking committee. And I am told that in 2018, the committee was formed. And I think one of the most prominent NGO activists, Montum Hantem, you must be knowing him also. He is also a member of that committee, along with most of the police, But the problem with this committee is that the police officials keep getting transferred after every 2 years. So when the official is acquainted with trafficking and the traffickers' modus operandi within a year or two, by the time he is ready to implement, he's transferred to another department. So that is a major problem in Manipur, I observe. But we really need, a state law, a state policy to tackle human trafficking. Just like in Goa, there is a separate law to deal with trafficking. And they do not have to depend on the Immoral Traffic Prevention Act or any other law, all right? So Manipur needs one particular policy and a law to be implemented, number one. Number two is that we need to ensure social security for the poor and the needy. There has to be a kind of resources that has to be shared equally with all the communities, if not equally. A good amount of schemes, welfare schemes, should be penetrated into these areas where most of the victims come from. And majority of them in my study are tribals. And this is affirmed by the police. This is affirmed by the Department of Social Welfare in Imphal. It's not only my own finding, but the official records also, affirms what I am just saying. So it is due to not only poverty, but it's also due to conflict. And also it is due to, this or aspiration for better life, aspiration for greener pastures. So if the state, the government can provide social security, can provide opportunities, like for example, if the government can really provide good educational institutions in the nook and corner of hill district as well as in the valley, one of the problem will be solved by that. See, in the hill district, the schools are not functioning properly. And therefore, if the state government can implement bring about good educational institutions, not only schools, but even colleges. Why do you think, Elizabeth, that after class 12, we all were made to go out to Delhi University or in Calcutta, Mumbai, or Delhi, or Bangalore, or Chennai? Why? Because our parents want to give us the best of the best. Since the educational institutions are not up to the mark in the state. So if we can produce world-class colleges like St. Stephen's, Miranda House, or I'm citing Delhi University colleges, since we are all familiar with. In Manipur, if we have an equivalent of LSR, Lady Sri Ram College, for example, or Miranda House, or Jesus and Mary College, or St. Stephen, or Hindu College, Hensras College. I mean, where is the need for our people, young people, to get out of the state? And also schools. Why do you think a lot of middle class, upper middle class families pushes their children out of Manipur? They don't want to let their children study in Manipur. That's also, speaks volumes of the fact that we don't have good educational institutions at all. And then talking of the poor, they don't have access to good education because the fees are high. And the government schools are not functioning properly. The teachers are not there most of the time. And much more about the murky politics of teachers' recruitment and teachers not teaching in the classroom after being recruited. So all these are, if all these factors can be addressed and can be arrested by the state government, I think a huge portion of the problem that I'm talking about will be reduced. But I also wish to say that human trafficking today is a global pandemic. It is a multi-million-dollar business and very, very difficult. When I was doing my postdoc in USA, I found that FBI cannot even catch some of the traffickers in the United States. So it's in Europe. So it is a global phenomenon where every person, you and I including, should fight against this pandemic. I hope I'm able to satisfy you.
Vashati, can I have a question?
Yes, please.
Thank you, Professor Niumai, for this lecture. My question is, since you have been working in this field and you have your experience with the victims and the NGOs and the officials who are into it. Professor Niumai, my question is, as you have just mentioned, we all know the kind of work we are talking about. It's prostitution, self-trade, where women are objectified, where the age of the woman is such a big thing. So as you have mentioned, as one of your case studies where you were talking to this lady who is 50 plus, about to reach 60, where she is telling you that how age is such a big issue. So, Professor Niumai, I mean, did you ever counter or did you ever ask any NGO or like had any experience if there is even any attempt to sort of rehabilitate these women, since as we know that for them age is such a big thing and they are like not going to even earn I mean, as you mentioned, even less than 100 rupees. I mean, is there ever any attempt to even rehabilitate them or kind of integrate them to the society after they don't have the age left?
Thank you for your question. Not all NGOs are providing a space for these women to be trained in certain vocations or in certain skills. Not every NGO are doing that, but there are few NGOs, like for example, Prajwala in Hyderabad. Okay, they provide vocational trainings to the victims and empower them by opening bank accounts and also allowing them to set up their own businesses like Kirana store, for example, or tailoring shop, or beauty parlors and things like that. But there are NGOs like Impulse NGO Network in Northeast. They do not have a shelter home. They do not provide, shelter for the women at all. But they network with those NGOs that have Ujwala shelter home. And once they rescue the girls or the children, they contact their partnering NGOs in the state or in the neighboring state, and then keep the girls for a couple of months or even a year or so. For example, I remember that Impulse NGO Network had rescued a girl from Shillong. The girl has a mental problem, has to be on medication. Shillong doesn't have that. So the girl was brought to Prajwala home in Hyderabad. In fact, the founder and I myself have gone to meet the girl and spend more than an hour talking to her, So my answer is that not every NGO has that facility to provide vocational trainings and impart skills on these women. There are very few.
Thank you, Professor.
Can I, Bashudi, ask a question?
Yes, ma'am, please.
Okay. So thank you, Professor Niumai. I just want to just flag one issue based on the research that we have done on migration. I feel there is a very thin line between migration for work and trafficked for work.
Right.
Because you yourself have said that there are many who really voluntarily decided to be trafficked for employment.
Yeah.
So how do we then understand this? How do you approach this issue in a way that it doesn't affect women's mobility for employment? At the same time, it's a very important issue. It's a serious issue, but I think putting too much weight into the trafficking discourse would always also mean that migration for work is also to be seen as trafficking to some extent, because the moment you bring in the forced labor element, a lot of migration for work will also be seen as trafficking. And then the whole social issue that comes up, and the kind of discrimination that is there in terms of looking at the kind of issues that may come up in terms of identifying women as trafficked. The stigma associated with that is, I think, an issue, and this is something which I thought should also be thought through in terms of our discussions on trafficking and how do we address this issue.
Very good question, and very much relevant to what I have just spoken. When I link these women who move out of Manipur or who migrated from Manipur to metropolitan cities and abroad, say to work as a nanny or housemaid or to work as a receptionist, I am using United Nations definition of trafficking because it says clearly that if a person is coerced to work in a certain or engage in a certain profession, or is involved in harboring transportation, to a destination country and then deceive, that comes under trafficking, according to United Nations definition of trafficking, right? So therefore, when we look at from a UN definition perspective, if the girl after reaching destination is deceived and then is forced to do the work, to engage in a work that she is not promised to, like for example, she's given a promise to work as a receptionist. After reaching the destination, she's not. And then another example is that she voluntarily went with a job recruiting agent, all right, to Singapore, for example. After landing there, some of my respondents' story, I'm just reflecting. They're supposed to work as a nanny, housekeeping job, but then they were forced to work in a spa or a nightclub. Isn't that trafficking? Dr. Neeta, I hope you got my answer. So according to the United Nations definition, a person who is coerced to do or engage in a work based on coercion or deception is human trafficking. So that way, the woman have voluntarily migrated for work, but after reaching the destination, she's been deceived. In fact, some of my respondents told me that they were not paid for 6 months. They were not paid because the agent says that, look, we are recovering the airfare and the passport and the visa fees, which was never discussed in the beginning. And that is deception. They are deceived, and that comes under human trafficking.
I think we can engage with the discussion later sometime, because I think there is a difference in terms of deception and trafficking, because deception, of course, is an issue. Deception is of course an issue. There are a lot of cases where employment has been, where people get into employment and then they are being kind of deceived in terms of the payments and things like that, conditions of work. There's a lot of cases where employment contracts or employment relations are not followed the way one expected it to be done. So that is, I think I agree that, but to call that employment related, the issues as trafficking and clubbing everything into the larger terminology of trafficked. Internationally, I'm not talking about it, but migration within cities, migration within the country, there could be trafficking also. I'm not saying that there can't be trafficking. There could be trafficking also, but I think it is important for us to make a distinction between migration for work and trafficking, and migration for work and then employment related issues separately, because the stigma associated with trafficking and how women who migrate are sometimes drawn into this understanding of being trafficked, and the social stigma then that follows. This is my, we can have a discussion later, but I think it is important for us to keep that also, that discussion also, parallelly, because we should not be just kind of putting everything into one box and then talk about trafficking.
Yeah, okay.
Being trafficked.
Thank you for your viewpoint. I respect your viewpoint. Let me also add two things. Number one is that human trafficking is the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of persons by improper means such as force, abduction, fraud, or coercion for an improper purpose, right? Including forced labor or sexual exploitation. Number two is that when the job recruiting agents recruit these ladies in Manipur, or when the women respond to the advertisement voluntarily for jobs in metropolitan cities or abroad, they were promised to give, say, minimum 20,000. That is what most of my respondents mentioned, for 20,000 to 40,000. And they will be given free lodging. They will be given this food and all that. But once they reach their destinations, they were deceived. You know, they were not given the salaries. They were not given the kind of job that they expected. So then, they would call up their parents. Some of them were rescued by the NGOs and police, as I mentioned, and they were deeply traumatized, you know. And the cases were handled by the Department of Social Welfare and the anti-human trafficking units for many of these young girls. I want to affirm finally that my respondents were from a shelter home, Ujwala shelter home. And the respondents were given by the police and the NGOs, including the Department of Social Welfare. It's very difficult for me or for you or for any researcher to interview somebody who is on the transit or who is in their destination. It is next to impossible for us to get respondents from the victims. So I must confess that I interview people who were rescued already, many of them were already rehabilitated, were already counseled. So, I mean, this is what I want to clarify, Dr. Neeta. But thank you.
Can I give you an example as to why I am talking about this issue? You know, like in our survey, one of our surveys, we actually met two girls in the village who were actually trafficked victims, so-called trafficked victims. And their story was that they wanted to migrate to a city to take up domestic work. And they were traveling with one of the relatives from the village. And they were caught in the railway station. While they were going, they were caught in the railway station saying that they are being trafficked. And they actually escaped in between from the police. They were hiding and all that, but they were tracked and they were taken to a shelter home. So they reached the shelter home, but they wanted to come to the city and work and earn because they were in distress. The family was in distress, but the NGO and the police ensured that they were back to the village. These two girls. It's not that they were taken back to the village. They also then had the stigma of, this being trafficked and then taken back to the village. So, in such a context, this overemphasis on trafficking and overemphasis on women should be rescued from trafficking is something that's affecting women's mobility, right to move and right to take up work. That's the issue which I wanted to highlight. There are many cases like that. And it's also equally important for us to understand and see that we don't put everything under the larger banner of trafficking. This is what
your point is well taken, Dr. Neeta, and I also appreciate you for sharing your viewpoint.
Thank you. Is there any question?
Is there some time that I can just ask a question?
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. I just wanted to know, because throughout the study, what I have heard is about the migration outside the state. But what about the migration within the state from the rural areas to the city areas? So without looking into the phenomena that is going within the state, how can we think of a policy to restrict or to contain trafficking, and also to address the issue of sex work in Manipur? Because sex work in Manipur, I've done a little study sort of there as part of my PhD. Sex work, actually I've actually contacted with the social welfare department also. The phenomena of sex work is very, very different in Manipur. There is an assumption that only the tribal people or only the Pangal people or Muslim people majority of them are into sex work. That is incorrect. A lot of Meitei women from the Meitei are into sex work. So and they are afraid there is no sex workers policies or scheme in the social welfare department. The only list they have is in the name of drug users. I mean, sex work is synonymous with drug users because they cannot afford to buy drugs. That's why they are indulging into sex work. But there is a large number of sex workers who are actually victims of violence, who are actually victims of Armed Forces Special Power Act, who are actually victims of these things. So how can we address the issue of sex work and trafficking without actually having a fundamental questioning on the issue of violence, on the issue of the failure of the informal work sector, informal sector in Manipur, security of women, and all the various working women schemes of crèche and all that kind of thing. All these schemes are this thing is how can we just look into the trafficking and address the problem of sex works as well as trafficking by actually focusing on this particular study of the movement from a movement of work labor from Manipur to outside state. I was just curious to know about it, Professor.
Yeah, okay. Number one, let me say that it is very, very clear that in a state union, in the state, it's very important to have a law, just as I have given example during my lecture that Goa has its own law to deal with trafficking. That is the Goa Children's Act 2003. So just as Goa has that act, Manipur can also have, because most of the victims of trafficking in Manipur, which you and I know very well from the police and Department of Social Welfare, are the children below 18 years, mostly girls, and of course some boys included. And therefore that I am proposing that we can have, like Goa, this act, the Goa Children's Act kind of similar law for Manipur to deal with, to curb trafficking. So, I mean, I'm clear on that. And then the second part of your talk is that I look at, I have interviewed a whole range of sex workers, but I look at women who have already, like the example that I gave you of a woman from Bangalore who have worked as a housemaid, who was sexually exploited, came back, and then she clearly told that she was introduced to sex work by her friend. All right, so I look at those stories in the hotspot of Pauna Bazaar, Khoyathong, and Thangal Bazaar, and also in BOC. I have a group discussion, a focus group discussion in BOC, in that unofficial red light area. And I look at these women who have already been exploited and who were introduced through friends to do sex work, and how they were in a way trafficked earlier, coerced earlier, deceived earlier, and forced to engage to do something that they're not interested to do. And then later on, introduced to the world of sex. So, another thing I want to mention, during that focus group discussion, I met this 6-7 women who said that they are drug addicts. In fact, one of them mentioned that her husband is in the army, posted in northern part of India, and husband is not aware that she's in the sex work. And when I asked them, why you're doing when your husband is earning, aren't your husband sending the salaries? He said that she's addicted to drugs. So I'm not looking at those stories, all right? When we look at sex work, it's a huge area in which we can study in different perspective. I look at those women, those women who have already been exploited somewhere, all right? And then came back, they have no other skills, they have no other alternative, and then joined the sex work. So I'm very, very clear about it. And I also clearly mentioned as to how Simone de Beauvoir, in her work, The Second Sex, have also clearly mentioned that 50% of prostitutes have earlier worked as housemaids. And I try to connect it So that way I did a purposive sampling. So even in my methodology, I'm very clear. Okay, but thank you for all your comments.
Thank you, Professor Niumai. Just I would like to add a point that in India, from northeast part of India, there is a thing is called marriage migration. So many northeast women are in Haryana, married to Haryanvi boys, and due to their because the ratio male-female ratio is really low, female ratio. So many women are there who are not actually, it is difficult for them to adapt with the family, and they have a different system to marginalize the outsider in their social context. No, it is not related to trafficking or anything, but it is actually a different kind of migration due to their skin color, and they are attractive. So there is a kind of marriage migration, not only from Northeast, but from other states of India. But it is true that from Northeast, there are girls who are married to Haryanvi boys, and they are also having a difficult time to adjust with the family, which is a very different culture. I mean, language-wise, food-wise. So it's like just an addition I would like to share with you.
I think most of the girls who are married to Haryanvi men are drawn from Assam, and not only from Assam, but also from West Bengal and also from Kerala.
And also from Dimapur, Nagaland. I think
not many. Majority are drawn from Assam. I've read some of the works, and I think when we say Northeast, I think the maximum number of girls who are, made to marry Haryanvi men are Assamese girls from Assam who belong to different communities. Yeah, I do agree that they are facing different problems because they're racially different, and also their food habits, their cultures, their value systems, their belief systems are very different. So they still continue to be suppressed and subjugated.
Thank you so much, Professor Niumai, for your presentation. I am extremely thankful to you, and I also express my thanks to our webinar coordinator, Professor Seema Kazi, and other faculties of CWDS, and distinguished guests, friends and colleagues. Also Sundaresh sir and Neeruji for technical support. And thank you so much for this very interesting conversation, for very interesting participation, and thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you, Professor Niumai. Thank you.
Thank you, Seema. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.